Join me as I dive deep into the mystery and try to uncover the real story behind the 400-year gap in the Bible. The 400-year gap between the Old and New Testaments is one of the most fascinating and yet often overlooked periods in biblical history. It's a time of great change and transition, marked by the silence of God's prophets and the rise of new empires. But what really happened during this period, and why is it so important to our understanding of the Bible? Many of us have wondered what happened during this 400-year gap. Did God just stop speaking to his people? Were there no important events or figures that shaped the course of history? The lack of information can be frustrating, especially when we consider how much we know about the events leading up to it. The Old Testament is full of stories of prophets, kings, and other important figures, but then suddenly, there's this long period of silence. This gap has led to all sorts of questions and speculations. Some have seen it as a sign of God's disinterest or even abandonment of his people. Others have tried to fill in the gaps with their own stories and legends. But the truth is, we just don't know what happened during this time, at least not from the biblical record alone. As a result, this period has been largely overlooked in many biblical studies and teachings. We tend to focus on the more dramatic and well-known stories of the Old Testament, or the life and teachings of Jesus in the New. But what about the people who lived during this time? What were their lives like, and how did they understand their place in God's plan? During this 400-year period, the ancient world was undergoing some significant changes. The Persian Empire was rising to power, and with it, a new era of cultural and religious exchange. The Greeks were also making their mark, introducing their philosophy and art to the wider world. And in the midst of all this, the Jewish people were trying to survive and maintain their identity in a rapidly changing world. One of the key events during this time was the rebuilding of the Temple in Jerusalem. After the Babylonians had destroyed it, the Persian Empire allowed the Jews to return and rebuild. This was a significant moment, not just because it marked the restoration of worship, but also because it symbolized the Jews' continued connection to their God. Another important development during this time was the emergence of new religious ideas. The Jewish people were exposed to all sorts of philosophies and beliefs, from the dualism of the Persians to the humanism of the Greeks. This led to a diversity of thought and practice, and a renewed focus on individual spirituality. Despite this cultural and religious ferment, God's prophets remained silent. No longer were there figures like Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Ezekiel, speaking words of wisdom and warning. The heavens seemed to be silent, leaving the people to wonder if they had been abandoned. But as we'll see, this silence was not a sign of disinterest, but rather a sign of preparation. One of the most important discoveries that helps us understand the 400-year gap is the apocryphal texts. These texts, while not part of the biblical canon, provide valuable insights into the lives and beliefs of the Jewish people during this time. They offer a window into a world of struggle and doubt, but also of hope and faith. The apocryphal texts also highlight the importance of the silent period of prophecy. Rather than seeing it as a lack or a failure, we can understand it as a time of preparation and refinement. The Jewish people were being prepared for something new, something that would change the course of history forever. So what can we learn from the 400-year gap in the Bible? First and foremost, we learn that God's silence is not the same as his absence. Just because we don't hear his voice doesn't mean he's not working. We also learn that the Jewish people were not passive victims of history, but active participants in shaping their own destiny. In conclusion, the 400-year gap between the Old and New Testaments is a reminder that there's often more to the story than what we see on the surface. By exploring this forgotten period, we gain a deeper understanding of the biblical narrative and the people who lived during this time. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If you have any thoughts or questions about the 400-year gap, please share them in the comments below. And if you'd like to explore more biblical mysteries, be sure to check out my video on the secrets of the Dead Sea Scrolls.